She just wanted to deposit her hard-earned money, but instead they humiliated her in front of everyone. What they didn't know? She was the daughter of the bank's CEO, and what happened next changed everything. Watch to the end. You won't believe how one girl transformed an entire system. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Has this ever happened to you? The glass doors of the New City Bank opened with a soft hiss as 14-year-old Aisha Brooks stepped inside. Her sneakers made no sound on the polished marble floor. She clutched a large envelope in both hands, her heart beating a little faster than usual. This wasn't just a normal day for her. Today was a milestone. Today, she was going to deposit her very first $6,000 into her own savings account. To anyone watching, Aisha probably looked like just another teenager, dressed in a simple gray hoodie, faded jeans, and white sneakers. Her hair was neatly braided into 2 long plaits. She carried no expensive handbag, wore no flashy jewelry. There was no visible clue to suggest that this quiet black girl was the daughter of Ronald Brooks, the founder and CEO of the New City Bank network. But that was exactly how Aisha wanted it. She didn't want to be treated differently because of who her father was. Her father had always emphasized independence, hard work, and integrity. He'd taught her that real strength came not from privilege, but from perseverance and self-respect. So when she told him she wanted to open her own account and make her first deposit without his help, he had smiled with pride and simply said, "Go ahead. Show me what you've learned." Now, standing in the spacious main branch, Aisha took in the scene around her. High ceilings, chandeliers, and walls of frosted glass made the bank feel more like a luxury hotel lobby than a financial institution. There were neatly dressed employees moving briskly between desks. The faint hum of polite conversation and the occasional clatter of a keyboard filled the air. Everything was pristine, polished, and perfectly in place. She found the line for teller services and joined the end of it, the envelope pressed firmly to her chest. Her mind buzzed with thoughts, not of fear, but anticipation. She imagined herself handing over the money, watching the teller count it, and seeing the numbers pop up on the screen confirming her successful deposit. She imagined how proud her father would be when she told him how she handled it all on her own. The people in line ahead of her varied in age, attire, and expression. A man in a tailored blue suit tapped impatiently on his phone. An elderly woman clutched a small purse, peering up at the service numbers on the wall. A young couple whispered to each other as they examined loan brochures. Aisha noticed it all, absorbing the atmosphere while keeping her focus steady. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. She didn't mind waiting. This was important to her, and she wanted to do it the right way. But as time went on, she began to observe a pattern. A white man in his 50s entered the bank and was immediately greeted by a smiling employee in a dark blazer. "Good afternoon, sir. Please come with me to our VIP lounge," the employee said smoothly, leading the man past the line and into a room behind glass doors. Nobody protested. It seemed expected. A few minutes later, an elderly Asian couple approached the counter. No one greeted them. The teller behind the glass barely looked up, simply pointed toward the waiting area without a word. Aisha frowned slightly. That seemed cold. Next, a Latino man in a work uniform stepped forward to cash a small check. His interaction took longer than expected. The teller asked him to present an ID, his social security card, and even proof of employment. The questions came quickly and without patience. The man fumbled for his documents, clearly flustered. Aisha had watched another white customer cash a check earlier with no such requirements. A slight unease crept into her chest. She had attended financial seminars with her father before. She'd heard him speak about equality in service, about how every customer is valuable. But the contrast in treatment unfolding before her eyes was hard to ignore. She looked down at her hoodie, her jeans, her sneakers. Then she looked around again. No one here knew who she was. And she began to wonder, when it was her turn, how would she be treated? Finally, after nearly 40 minutes of waiting, the line moved forward. Aisha stepped up to the counter. Her heart skipped a beat, not from fear, but from determination. This was it, her first real financial act of independence. The teller, a young white woman named Karen, as indicated on her nameplate, did not smile. She looked at Aisha, then at the envelope, and back again. There was a pause. Aisha offered a polite smile and placed the envelope on the counter. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account," she said clearly. Karen didn't move. She stared at the envelope, then narrowed her eyes slightly. "Where did this money come from?" she asked flatly. Aisha blinked. That wasn't the kind of question she'd expected. She had seen others walk up, complete transactions, and walk away, all without interrogation. Why was she being asked this? "It's scholarship money," Aisha said, trying to keep her voice calm. "And birthday gifts. I won math competitions, regional level." Karen didn't react. She stared at Aisha as if trying to decide whether to believe her. After a moment, she turned to the teller next to her, a man in his 40s with slicked-back hair and a look of constant skepticism. "Thomas, can you come take a look at this?" she said, still not smiling. Aisha's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. Thomas stepped over, scanned the envelope, then Aisha herself, from her shoes to her braids. His expression wasn't openly hostile, but it was sharp, analytical. "This amount of money is a bit much for someone your age," he said. Aisha tightened her grip on the edge of the counter. "I've already told her. It's from scholarships and birthday gifts," she said again, her voice firm. Thomas let out a light snort and exchanged a glance with Karen, one of those silent conversations that said more than words ever could. Then, as if Aisha weren't standing there at all, he muttered under his breath, "Could be dirty money. Maybe someone's using her to deposit it." But Aisha heard him, every word. Her heart pounded harder now, not out of fear, but out of growing disbelief and indignation. She had done nothing wrong. She had earned this money. She had waited in line. She had come here in good faith. Yet somehow in this place her own father had built, she was being treated like a suspect. And that was only the beginning. Aisha stood still, her hands resting gently on the envelope that had suddenly become an object of suspicion. She felt the tension gathering around her like thick smoke. The proud anticipation she'd carried into the bank had been chipped away moment by moment, replaced now with confusion, disbelief, and something else she had rarely experienced in such intensity: humiliation. Karen didn't return her gaze. Instead, she whispered something to Thomas again, and both of them leaned slightly closer to each other, glancing sidelong at Aisha. She couldn't hear their words clearly, but she didn't have to. The expression on their faces, the way they looked at her like she didn't belong, told her everything. Aisha took a deep breath, straightened her back, and said with as much calm as she could muster, "This is my account. My name is Aisha Brooks. I'm here to deposit my own money." Thomas didn't flinch. He tilted his head and smirked, as if amused by her composure. His arms crossed over his chest, the kind of posture meant to intimidate. "Do you have any documentation to prove the source of the funds?" he asked. Aisha's brow furrowed. "Why would I need to prove where birthday money and scholarship awards came from? That's standard procedure for large cash deposits, Karen replied, but Aisha knew that wasn't true. She had seen customers before her walk up with checks, with envelopes, with all sorts of deposits. None of them were grilled the way she was being grilled now. I watched that man before me walk straight into the VIP lounge without even showing ID, Aisha said, pointing toward the still-closed glass doors. You didn't ask him anything. You didn't ask the couple before me either. Why am I being treated differently? Thomas's eyes hardened. You need to calm down, young lady, he said sharply. This isn't about race, it's about policy. But Aisha had been raised to see through lies, to recognize when someone used policy to cover prejudice. I am calm, she replied evenly. I just want to be treated like everyone else. Karen sighed, clearly annoyed. We have the right to question suspicious activity. That's in our handbook. Aisha's throat tightened. Suspicious activity? For what? Being a black teenager in a hoodie with more money than they thought she should have? She reached into her hoodie pocket and pulled out her account card, sliding it across the counter. You can look it up. It's my account, my name, my information. Karen picked up the card, looked at it, then looked back at Aisha as if still expecting something to be wrong. She tapped on her keyboard, her fingers stiff. The screen in front of her blinked to life, displaying Aisha's account profile. After a few seconds, Karen's face changed slightly, not with guilt, but with deeper suspicion. Why is your account linked to a corporate branch? She asked. Aisha didn't answer right away. She hadn't wanted to play that card, but now, pushed into a corner, she realized she might have no choice. My father set it up for me, she said. Thomas raised an eyebrow. And who exactly is your father? Aisha hesitated. She didn't want to say it. She didn't want to be treated with respect only because of a name. But before she could answer, Karen leaned in, voice sharp. Are you claiming your father works for the bank? He owns the bank, Aisha replied quietly, firmly. There was a pause. Thomas scoffed audibly. Right, he said, laughing a little. And I'm the President of the United States. Karen shook her head and gave Thomas a look of exasperated disbelief. We don't have time for games. If you don't have documentation for this deposit, we can't process it. Aisha stared at them, her cheeks burned. She didn't know whether it was from rage or shame. She wasn't lying. She wasn't doing anything wrong. She had come in with her head held high, just like her father taught her. And now she was being treated like a liar, a criminal. A few customers had turned their heads by now. She could feel their eyes on her. Not all of them looked hostile. Some looked uncertain, curious, but no one spoke. I've told you the truth, she said again, her voice beginning to tremble despite her efforts to stay strong. You just don't believe me. Thomas took a step back, then leaned toward another teller, speaking in hushed tones. Karen remained at the counter, still staring at Aisha like she was a puzzle that didn't fit. After a moment, Thomas returned and crossed his arms again. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside while we verify the account. We might need to involve security if you continue raising your voice. I'm not raising my voice, Aisha said, more to herself than to them. Karen's gaze remained cold. You're making this more difficult than it needs to be. Difficult? For who? Aisha took a shaky breath. Her heart pounded in her chest, the envelope still resting on the counter, untouched. She had done everything right, and yet somehow in this moment she was being treated as though she had no right to stand here at all. She looked around again. The man who had walked past the line earlier was now sipping coffee in the glass room, casually laughing with another employee. The elderly Asian couple was still waiting silently in the corner. A Spanish-speaking father and daughter had entered a few minutes ago and were now standing in line behind her, quietly watching the scene unfold. No one said anything. The silence was heavier than shouting. Aisha felt her stomach turn. Her eyes locked on the screen in front of Karen. Her name was there, her account was there, the balance was there, and yet none of it mattered, because they had already decided she didn't belong here. Karen glanced at Thomas again. He gave a subtle nod. "I'm going to need you to wait while I call the manager," Karen said. Aisha nodded once. But as Karen turned to pick up the phone, Aisha reached into her hoodie pocket again. Not for documents, not for money, but for her phone. She unlocked it with a swipe and found the number she knew by heart. Then, calmly, she pressed call. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make a scene. She simply brought the phone to her ear, took a breath, and said, "Hi, Dad. I need you to come to the main branch. They won't let me deposit my money." The front doors of New City Bank burst open with a sharp click, drawing every eye in the lobby. Conversations halted. Keyboards stopped clicking. Even the low background music seemed to fade away. A tall man in a navy blue tailored suit entered with measured, powerful steps. His presence was undeniable, an aura of authority radiating from every move. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. Ronald Brooks, CEO and founder of New City Bank, had arrived. He didn't glance around. He didn't need to. He walked straight through the lobby, his coat sweeping behind him like a storm wind, past stunned employees and frozen customers, until he reached the counter where his daughter stood. Karen stiffened. Her fingers froze mid-dial, still holding the phone receiver she had only just picked up. Thomas instinctively stepped back, his mouth slightly open, as if unsure whether to apologize or pretend he wasn't involved. Aisha looked up and felt the knot in her chest slowly loosen. Her father placed one hand gently on her shoulder, then looked at Karen and Thomas, his gaze sharp as glass. "Who here refused to serve my daughter?" Ronald asked, his voice low but cutting like a blade through silence. Neither Karen nor Thomas responded. They didn't have to. Their faces said everything. The color drained from Karen's cheeks. Thomas dropped his gaze, his lips pressed together tightly. Ronald turned to his daughter. "Aisha, tell me exactly what happened." She told him, calmly, clearly, every word steady. How she waited in line, how she watched other customers walk past her, greeted warmly, assisted quickly, how she was questioned about her money, accused without evidence, humiliated for no reason other than the way she looked and the clothes she wore. Ronald listened in silence, his jaw tightening with every detail. When Aisha finished, he nodded once and turned back to the employees. "Is this true?" he asked, though his tone made it clear the question was rhetorical. Thomas opened his mouth, but the words stumbled. We're just following security protocol," he said finally. Karen quickly added, "It was an unusually large amount for a child, sir. We were just being cautious." Ronald stepped forward, just enough to make them flinch. "You were being prejudiced," he said flatly. "You made assumptions based on her appearance. You decided she didn't belong here. You interrogated her like a criminal. In my bank." The word "my" landed with the force of a hammer. Just then, the assistant branch manager appeared, drawn by the rising tension. A short man with a badge that read Derek Marsh, he looked between Ronald and the employees, already piecing together what had happened. But before he could speak, Ronald addressed him directly. "I want the branch manager now." Derek hesitated, then nodded quickly and turned toward the manager's office. Karen and Thomas stood rooted in place. Neither spoke. Neither moved. Customers watched in stunned silence. One woman slowly backed away, pulling her toddler with her, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. Aisha remained still at her father's side, her hands no longer shaking. She had told the truth. That was enough. Within moments, a new figure emerged from the hallway, Jessica Hale, branch manager of the main office. Blonde, poised with a tailored navy dress and a composed expression, she moved quickly toward the scene. "Mr. Brooks," she said smoothly, extending a hand, though she already looked uneasy. "I wasn't aware you were—" He didn't shake her hand. "You have a problem in your branch," Ronald said, "a very big one." Jessica glanced at Karen and Thomas, noting their expressions. Her eyes flicked to Aisha. Something cold and calculating passed over her face, but it vanished quickly. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding," she said, trying to smile. "We always encourage proper verification, especially with minors. Surely you understand the need for—" "You will not explain this away to me," Ronald cut in. "What I see here is discrimination, and not only toward my daughter." Jessica blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" she asked. Ronald turned and gestured to a small group near the back, an elderly Asian couple who had been waiting without service for over an hour, a Spanish-speaking father and daughter who were still standing in line despite arriving long ago, and Aisha, the young black girl who had waited her turn, only to be accused and rejected. Jessica's posture faltered. "I'll need to review the security footage," she said. "If you'll just give me some time." "You already had time," Ronald said sharply. "You just didn't care." "But I do." At that moment, across town, inside the corporate headquarters of New City Bank, the situation was already escalating. In the executive boardroom, a large monitor displayed a live feed from the main branch. A group of top-ranking officials and board members were watching in rigid silence as Ronald confronted the staff. No one spoke. On another screen, technicians had begun reviewing past surveillance footage from the last few days. What they found confirmed Ronald's worst fears. "Sir," one technician said, swallowing hard, "it's not just Aisha. It's been happening constantly." The room turned. The technician pulled up video after video. Black, Latino, and Asian customers waiting significantly longer than white ones. Being asked for excessive documentation, ignored, mistreated. Meanwhile, white customers were ushered in quickly, treated with ease and respect. "This isn't an isolated incident," the security chief muttered. "This is a pattern." Back at the branch, Ronald looked directly at Jessica. "You're done here," he said coldly. Jessica flinched. "Mr. Brooks, please. This is all very sudden." "No, it's been going on for a long time. You just didn't expect to get caught." Behind her, Karen looked at the floor, her eyes wide and unfocused. Thomas's hands twitched slightly. Sweat had begun to form along his temples. "You've created a culture of silence and bias," Ronald continued, "and today you humiliated my daughter. That was your final mistake." He turned to the security guard stationed by the door. "Escort Miss Hale, Mr. Thomas, and Miss Karen out of the building. Their employment is terminated immediately." The guard hesitated. He had never seen anything like this before, but nodded and moved forward. Jessica stepped back, her face tight with disbelief. "You can't do this without HR approval." "I'm the CEO," Ronald said. "I can do this whenever I see a betrayal of our values." Karen's lips parted as if to speak, but she stopped herself. Thomas didn't even try. As the three were quietly escorted through the lobby and out the front doors, no one clapped, no one cheered. But every employee standing nearby understood the message. The old rules were over. Ronald turned to the assistant manager. This branch, and every other, will undergo a full review. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated from anyone ever again. Aisha stood beside him, silent. Her shoulders were square, her expression steady. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat, because this wasn't about winning. It was about making things right. 3 weeks had passed. The main branch of New City Bank looked the same from the outside. Same tall windows, same polished nameplate on the stone facade. But inside, everything had changed. New protocols, new systems, and a new atmosphere filled the building. The memory of what had happened with Aisha Brooks still lingered, not just in the minds of the staff, but etched into the foundation of the entire bank. And today, Aisha returned. She came alone. No suit-clad father at her side, no cameras, no attention. Just Aisha, 14, in a worn navy hoodie, old jeans, and a gray baseball cap pulled low. She wanted no one to recognize her. She didn't want her name to carry the weight of reform. She only wanted to know if the reform was real. She stepped through the doors, the same ones she had stood in front of weeks earlier, clutching her envelope full of cash and hope. Only this time, she wasn't nervous. She was watching. The lobby looked calmer, more welcoming. A receptionist stood near the entrance, greeting customers with a genuine smile. A line had formed near the tellers, but it moved briskly. Aisha quietly joined the end of it. Ahead of her, a Spanish-speaking man in work clothes approached the counter. He handed over a check. The teller, someone Aisha didn't recognize, smiled, spoke slowly and clearly, and handled the transaction without delay. No unnecessary questions. No suspicious glances. Behind her, a black woman in a nurse's uniform entered, holding a folder of documents. The receptionist greeted her with the same warmth as the last customer. "Good afternoon, ma'am. How can we help you today?" Aisha's fingers tightened slightly around the check in her hand, this one for $10,000. A new scholarship, a new test. When it was her turn, she stepped forward and froze for a moment. It was Beth. Beth, the teller who had first received her at the counter weeks ago, the one who had stared, stayed silent, and let Thomas and Karen humiliate her. She hadn't said a word in her defense. Aisha remembered her face clearly. Beth looked up. Their eyes met, and for a moment the entire bank felt still again. But then Beth offered a soft, hesitant smile. Not a smile of recognition or awkwardness, just one of quiet professionalism. "Good afternoon," Beth said gently. "How can I help you today?" Aisha placed the check on the counter. "I'd like to deposit this into my savings account." Beth nodded without hesitation, took the check, and pulled up Aisha's account on her screen. She didn't glance at a manager, didn't whisper to a colleague, didn't question the amount. She processed the deposit with care, tapping on her keyboard with practiced efficiency. "Everything looks great. Would you like a receipt emailed or printed?" "Printed, please." Within seconds, the receipt slid across the counter. Aisha looked it over, then looked up. Beth didn't avert her eyes. There was something different in her expression this time, a firmness, a sincerity. Aisha gave a small nod. "Thank you." "You're very welcome," Beth said, and she meant it. As Aisha turned to leave, she scanned the bank once more. An elderly black man stood near another counter, being helped patiently by a young teller who spoke to him with genuine kindness. A middle-aged Asian woman was filling out forms while an employee stood beside her, explaining each step without condescension. A single Latin father entered with his daughter, and they were immediately approached and offered assistance. No one was ignored. No one was judged. It wasn't perfect. Aisha knew that, but it was different. Tangibly, undeniably different. She stepped back out into the sunlight. The breeze brushed gently across her face, and for the first time since that terrible morning, she felt something settle in her chest. Peace. She had walked into that bank alone weeks ago and left feeling small. Today, she walked out with her head held high. Later that same week, she sat in her father's office at headquarters. Ronald Brooks stood near the window, gazing out over the city skyline. Behind him, the room was filled with whiteboards, charts, and digital dashboards, each one tracking data from every branch in the country. One screen showed customer satisfaction. Another monitored anonymous complaint reports. A third displayed a rolling list of completed anti-bias training modules across staff. The reform had started. But Ronald knew it couldn't stop. "I want it all monitored," he said, turning to his COO. "Transactions, complaints, treatment patterns. I want our fairness rating to be real, not just a slogan." "Yes, sir," Diane replied, tapping notes into her tablet. "We've already updated the employee evaluation system. Any discriminatory behavior results in immediate review and possible termination." "And rewards?" "Employees who receive positive feedback for professionalism and fairness will be promoted faster. Bonuses will reflect customer experience as much as performance." Ronald nodded. "We're building something that should have existed from the start." He turned to Aisha, who sat silently on the sofa. "Are you proud?" he asked. Aisha paused. "I'm hopeful." Ronald smiled faintly. "Good, because this is just the beginning." The following month, the bank's internal magazine ran a cover story about the reforms. But Aisha refused to do interviews. She didn't want to be the face of a corporate apology. She just wanted to know that when someone walked into any branch, anyone from anywhere, they'd be treated like they mattered. And that she was finally starting to believe. A few days later, she returned to the bank again. This time, not to test it, just to watch. She sat quietly in a corner of the lobby. No one recognized her. A young man helped an elderly woman with a cane. A white teller shook hands with a black teen applying for his first student loan. A woman wearing a hijab walked out smiling, clutching her new debit card. The bank was still the same building, but now it had a different soul. Aisha stood, turned, and left without a word. She didn't need a headline. She didn't need applause. She had seen the change with her own eyes. That was enough. One girl, one moment, and a system that will never be the same again. Because real change starts when someone refuses to stay silent. If this story moved you, hit the like button, share it with others, and subscribe for more powerful stories. Leave a comment below. Your voice matters.